and go over the observation plan idea. So that will help you with the next assignment. We're struggling with working out some video stuff at the moment. The chair recommended that we used an iPad to film at the playground, and now we can't work out how to get the video downloaded in a way that I can add it to MediaSite. So keep an eye out on Blackboard. There should be some more TGMD films that we did last Friday. And then yesterday we videoed a motor skill intervention session. So just keep an eye out on Blackboard on the lab page. I will email or put out an announcement as soon as I've been able to get that sorted out. Okay? Because one of the things I would wanted to do possibly tomorrow was take a look at the motor skill intervention film with you so that you could point things out to me and be thinking about how to do your playground analysis tasks for lab. Okay? So just keep an eye out. I'll get in touch as soon as I'm able to sort out how to work with the film. Okay, so let's finish this chapter. All right, so we've been looking at the development of walking. Okay, so and remember that a rate controller, a rate limiter is an individual constraint. Okay. So a lot of the changes that we see occur as we get older can impact our walking pattern and become a rate controller. So if I get a degenerative joint, like osteoarthritis in my hip or my knee, then we're going to see a very different walking pattern as that gets progressively worse. Okay? So structural constraints are the most obvious, right? But we've also got, other examples of functional constraint. With intervention, some of these constraints could be reversible, right? So if I get a hip replacement or if I get medication that controls the pain, things like that, then we're able to maybe reverse the decline in the walking pattern and improve it a little bit again, right? Or it could just be walking more slowly because we're getting weaker, or we're fearful of slipping over, all right? We may see some interaction between structural constraints and functional constraints. Right? One of the things we have to pay attention to, though, is once we start to see a decline in walking, then that leads to further decline in strength of both the bones and the muscles. So it's really important that we try to intervene and keep our elderly population more physically active, make sure that they're staying strong so that they can maintain their independence, they don't get discouraged about trying to be physically active, all right? so running, somewhere around 6 to 7 months. I think we had covered this next couple of slides. So remember that running is also a 50% phasing of the leg action because each leg does half the movement, but that the difference between running and walking is that we see a flight phase, okay? And we mentioned that the brain kind of reverts back to some of the early walking type behaviors to maintain stability as we add a little bit more speed in. And as we become more proficient, what we're looking at is a trade-off between stability and mobility. So as we become more efficient, we're more interested in the mobility. How quickly can I get from one place to the other? And so the pattern alters to prefer mobility, and we see less stability. All right, so I think this is where we had got to. Right? So we can see with running a similar thing to what we would see maybe with throwing, that physical growth and maturation are going to improve any quantitative measure of running, like speed, right? So I'm going to be faster just because I grew and matured some, right? So we've got to be careful to make sure that we're paying attention to the qualitative, to the what's happening, changes in running pattern, all right? Because faster doesn't necessarily mean that the pattern is efficient, all right? And often when we look at adults running, we still see poor characteristics for the motor pattern, right? So we might see adults running with their arms straight or with their arms swinging across their body, right? These are not biomechanically efficient. As we get older though, again, running is relatively stable during most of your adulthood. As we get older, we start to see a switch back to that stability idea. We don't want to necessarily be so mobile and risk falling over, so we're going to change the pattern a little bit to become more stable. It doesn't have to be a conscious change. It might be a conscious change, right? But it could be unconscious, and it's just the brain's way of making sure that you're as stable as possible. So stride length will shorten. We'll see less rotation of the hips. Speed will slow down. Don't forget that we're also seeing a decline in type 2 muscle fibers, so speed and power are going to slow down anyway, all right? But if I am physically active, then I can continue to run into very senior, right? So the rate controllers, we've got to have more force to get off the floor, right? And we've got to be able to maintain our balance, so we need nice strong legs, right? Very small changes in any constraint as we get older can have quite a large impact on the running pattern, right? So, can we provide opportunity? Is it that seniors don't walk or run because they don't have the ability to walk and run? Or is it a perception of opportunity to go and walk and run, right? Is there a safe space for them to do that, all right? So I want to show you this clip because this is what can happen, right? If we're prepared to take care of ourselves and be physically active for our whole lifespan. Let me see if I can get this clip to work.
We are just a few sleeps away from...
Okay, are you seeing that? Yes, good, okay.
The Good Life Fitness Victoria Marathon, and if you are running the 8K, the half, or the full marathon, you will see all sorts of people from different walks or runs of life out on the course. And Hans Sandberg proves that this event is for runners of all ages. Yes, Hans Sandberg won't be the fastest participant in this year's half marathon, but he also will not be the slowest, which is pretty impressive because he is 89 years young. He is the oldest runner in the event. The former gymnast took up running late in life. Now, Hans hasn't always been the picture of health, former smoker and drinker. Sandberg's own 12-step program was literally a matter of putting one foot in front of the other.
I gave up smoking a long time ago, and I used to have a few drinks, but all that I gave up. I run 3 times a week. My run is usually 5K, you know, along Dallas Road. It's a lot of fun. Now, 3,000 meters of the 10Ks keeps me happy and keeps stress away from you, no tension. You know, you feel free and you enjoy life better.
Go get him. Hans will see you on the course this weekend. We are just a few sleeps away from the Good Life Fitness Victoria.
So what do you think about that?
That's amazing.
Awesome.
It's pretty cool, isn't it? I know, I hope to live to 89. I'm not sure, I don't run now, so I'm not sure I'll be running at 89, but yeah, isn't that amazing? And just, you know, I think just to look at his, I mean, his eyes are sparkling and his, you know, he's coherent and having fun, and I just think it's, I mean, he's obviously been very lucky genetically, right? Doesn't, although if he was a gymnast, he probably did have some injuries, but doesn't look like he's had anything major, doesn't look like he's had any major disease issues, cancer or anything like that. Maybe he has, and he's just managed to rehab very well, but he looks like just generally he's been a pretty healthy person, which, you know, obviously helps. And that plays a role, but still, how great is it to see that, right? I just love that piece of film. Okay, so let's look at an observation plan. So one of the first steps, let me find the page number for you. One of the first steps for the observation plan is developmental sequence, and the developmental sequence for this plan is on page 74. And you can note that it's a hypothesized sequence, which means it has not been validated with enough research, but the people who put it together are really, really top-class motor development researchers, so it's pretty accurate, okay? And what we're looking at here is the textbook's version of a motor skill assessment. So in lab, we've covered the MSU chart and the TGMD3. as motor skill assessments, and we said that they were total body approaches to assessment. Now, what the book puts together for us is what's called a component approach to motor skill assessment, all right? The difference being, instead of there being a score, one score for the skill, we have a score for each element of the skill. So we're going to break the skill up into its major components, and then we're going to develop like a mini MSU chart for each component. All right, so we have a score for each component rather than a score for the skill as a whole. Okay. So it's when you look at the developmental sequence, there's a little more description there on these components. The people that put this together decided that for running they only really needed 2 components. What were the legs doing and what are the arms doing, right? If you're a running coach, you might feel that that's too simplistic and that there's something else, another component that should be added. But as the researchers who put this together, they felt that those 2 components really defined running, okay? So once we've decided what our components are, and we have an idea in our head of this developmental sequence, right? So the developmental sequence, as I said, is like a mini MSU chart for the component. So we have stage 1, they call it step 1 in the sequence, step 2, step 3, step 4. And the same idea applies, right? That what we expect based on the research is that an individual will pass through each stage before they get to the competent stage, okay? So it's the exact same idea as the information that we covered in the lab class earlier in the semester, all right? We just added another element by splitting it up into pieces now, okay? So once we've got the idea of what are the steps, to turn it into a usable assessment tool, they suggest that we create a series of questions that will get at what the next stage looks like. The easiest way to do it is to compile a yes-no question, right? Because then the person using the assessment just has to say, did I see that, yes or no, right? So for the leg action, all right, the first question they want to ask, you have to stand side on. You've got to be at right angles to the plane of motion, right? And so they want to look at something that means you have to watch from the side, okay? And so the first question they want to know is there a flight phase between the steps, okay? Yes, no, okay? If it's no, then technically it's not running, right, as we've just looked at. So their no answer is a pre-run, right? If the answer is yes, that doesn't yet tell me everything that's going on with the legs. So I have to ask another question, all right? So the next question that these researchers came up with was, does the knee flex to at least 90 degrees on the recovery leg, on the recovery swing? And the reason they're interested in that idea is because it represents how much force is being applied to the floor, right? Because if my leg is barely bent, then I'm not pushing very hard off the floor, right? And what they want is force application and lots of push. And remember, the floor is going to push back, so as my foot comes up, it's going to flick up if I've pushed really hard, right? So that's why they're interested in that next question. Again, it's a yes-no question, right? So no says there's minimal flight and the individual may be flat-footed. So they're not pushing through their toe, they're not pushing hard through the floor. Okay? If it's a yes, they still felt that there was something else they needed to know about the leg action, all right, to make sure that it was really efficient. So the next question is based on something that's happening in the front back plane. So they want you to move either in front of the runner or behind the runner. And then they ask, does the swing leg remain primarily in the forward back plane? Okay, so remember that in chapter 3 we talked about the fact that to be the most efficient, we want to apply force in the plane of motion, right? So I don't want my arm swinging to the side if what I'm trying to do is run as fast forward as I can, right? So they're taking that same idea about the legs. If the pushing leg, as it comes off the floor, is kind of swinging around rather than driving straight through the middle, then there's been some sideways force application, and not all the force application is down and back. So that would be mechanically inefficient, and it would need addressing. Okay? So, no, there's a crossover swing. Yes, direct projection. And they felt that that was the definition of competency, right? I've got a flight phase, I've got force production indicated by the foot kicking up near the butt on the leg swing, and I've got efficient force application down and back. So step 3 would be my competent step, right, for the leg action. Does that make sense? So then we do the same thing for the other component, for the arms. All right? First question, are the arms active? So are they doing something purposeful? Right? Yes, no. No is step 1, that the arms are up high or middle guard. So this would be someone who is either very unexperienced or has some other issues going on that they need their arms out here, right? If the arms are active and the answer is yes, then we need another question. Do the arms move in true opposition to the legs, right? So the no answer, they're suggesting you might see something that's more bilateral, right? The yes answer means that you see very deliberate arms in opposition to the legs, not just because the arms are swinging around. Right? The next question, do the arms drive forward and back? Okay. No, the opposition has oblique arm swing. So now we've got the arm swinging across the body, which we know isn't mechanically efficient, right? And the yes would be the arms are going in the sagittal plane, in the front back plane. And that's what they felt would be competency for fundamental. Remember, this is a fundamental motor skill. We're not looking at elite sprinting. We're not looking at someone who's doing a hurdle race or a marathon run, right? We're looking at fundamental running. Can I get my person to step 3 for the leg action and step 4 for the arm action? Okay. So there's a lot of good things about an observation plan like this. It's relatively easy to use. It provides a lot more detail than a total body approach about what is happening in the skill with the pattern. But it takes a little bit longer. It's a bit more long-winded. Because you're looking at more than one component, it would be very difficult to do this without a camera, I feel, right? Because if I'm trying to score the legs separately from the arms, then that would be tricky, right? I'd want a camera. On the plus side, it gives me a very individualized picture of that person's running, right? And the steps, you might have guessed already, the steps don't progress at the same time, right? So I might see progression in the leg action before I see progression in the arm action, or vice versa, right? And it's going to depend a little bit on what, as the teacher, what do I emphasize for that person when we're practicing running. Any questions? So you're going to create an observation plan, okay? So make sure that you're understanding this concept here. Right? So our next locomotor skills that are relatively simple skills are jumping. So for jumping, typically we would say from 2 feet and land on 2 feet, although occasionally it could come off 1 foot and land on 2 feet, particularly if they're coming off something a bit higher. Okay? They have to land on 2 feet for it to be a jump. Right? Hopping is pushing off 1 foot, landing on the same foot. So you want to be careful when you're working with locomotor skills that you use the right terminology, because hopping in the States is often called jumping, and that's incorrect, right? If I'm going 1 foot to the same foot, that's hopping, not jumping, okay? And this is jumping, not hopping, right? Because that's 2 foot landing. So even though kangaroos hop and bunnies hop, this is not hopping, this is jumping, okay? And then the next one, leaping, is again a 1 foot takeoff, but this time we're going to land on the opposite foot, all right? So I take off 1 foot, I land on the other foot. That can go sideways, whoops! It can go sideways, it can go forwards, it can go backwards. The most common version is forwards, but the others are available to build up into multiple, more complex skills. next. Okay. Standing long jump has an observation plan that you can take a look at. Some of these other skills have developmental sequences. So there's lots of information in this chapter to help you with this idea of creating an observation plan that has different components for the skill. So we see jumping before we see hopping or leaping. Again, somewhat obviously because the child doesn't have enough strength in one leg yet to get itself off the ground and land without falling over. So jumping is the next skill that we see, and that can occur before the age of 2, particularly if mum and dad are very active and engaged and practicing movement type skills with the child. We can do, as adults, we can do a choice, right? We can jump horizontally and do a long jump, or we can jump vertically and do a reach jump, right? Again, think of the mechanics. If I'm jumping up as high as I can, then my force application is down into the ground. If I am jumping forward as far as I can, now my force application has to be down and back. So it's a little more complicated for the brain to do the long jump than the vertical jump initially, right? So what we see with younger children or people who aren't very strong is that they tend to have a big vertical component and not a very big horizontal component in their jumping, right? We also don't see a lot of like pre-bend and good arm swing initially. If we look at where's that table? No, that's the developmental sequence. I'm looking for the norms. Okay, I can't see that at the moment. Maybe they took that out of this one. Right, so early jumping, lots of vertical, very little flight, right? You may see them push off one foot more than the other foot because they may have one leg that's stronger than the other leg. And we saw a bit of film about that in the lab class. Right? So remember that you've got all those film clips at the web page to go and look at these behaviors so that you can really understand the descriptions that are being given to you, right? And think through what do I know about this skill? How do we jump forwards, right? What does my brain have to do to make me jump forwards, right? It's quite subtle, all right? And that's sometimes an issue, is that it seems so obvious, but it actually isn't. You need to think deeper into what you're watching and what you're seeing. Okay? So the more proficient we get, the more experience we get at jumping, the stronger we get as we get older, then we'll start to see some other movements occurring within the jump. So we'll see a crouch phase. Right, so we kind of pre-bend the legs. We get both feet leaving the ground at the same time instead of a one foot and then the other foot. We should see an arm swing. Doesn't matter whether we're doing a vertical jump or a horizontal jump, there should be an arm swing. Okay. time is it? Okay, let's have a quick look at these. Okay, so you can see she's pushing off one foot more than the other. She just about has her feet together for landing. Nothing happening with the arms. No purposeful bend in the legs before the jump. All right. Now I would say that this is a little delayed, right? I could be wrong, and it's always difficult on a film where there's not a lot of reference stuff in the background. She's either immensely tall for a late to early 3-year-old, or that's not very good jumping for her age. Okay, does that make sense? Now, she could have two parents who are basketball players and just be huge, right? In which case it would be appropriate, but we don't have that.
So, is it not good because she's not landing on both feet?
Yeah, and she's not pushing off both feet equally, and there's very, very little flight there, which would suggest that her legs are quite weak. And as I said, she could be a very tall, almost 3-year-old or just, 3. But if she's 3.5 or coming up for 4, I would expect to see something that was more coordinated, like both feet, and more height off the floor. The other thing, she could have just gone through a very rapid growth spurt in the last few weeks, and the muscles of her legs have not caught up yet. That's another possibility, especially at this age. The other one. Okay, so this is, if you go back to your MSU chart, this is a classic winging arm action, right? So she starts to swing her arms and then they just kind of wing around under her shoulder level rather than swinging and reaching into the jump. She doesn't finish pushing through on her legs. But I think it's indicative of someone that doesn't practice long jumping, but her legs look quite strong. I mean, she's getting quite a lot of lift off the floor. Okay. So again, we've got a situation where if we are only measuring the distance or the height of the jump, we're going to see quantitative increase in the numbers, in the scores, that could be based purely on growth and maturation and not on improvement in the motor pattern. All right, and what we're interested in is improving the motor pattern. All right, not all kids, adults jump well, right? Depends what kinds of sports or activities they do. You know, not all sports involve jumping, so, you know, there is an element of practice and experience there that some individuals might not get, right? So there's research that looks at jumping in college-age women, so your age, but not your population probably, and they were seeing pretty poor jumping patterns in college females. So, you know, inefficient, not using the mechanics to improve the skill. Okay. Rate limiters here, pretty obvious, right? I've got to develop enough force to get my body up off the ground from a stationary position. So that takes a lot of strength, and the brain has to understand how to apply that force depending on which jump I'm trying to do, right? So what we see with young children or people who are inexperienced, the brain can't switch from vertical to horizontal like we could, right? If we were down in the gym and I said, okay, now do a long jump, now do a high jump, you wouldn't have any trouble. You wouldn't even think about the fact that you were applying force differently to the floor. You would just do it, probably, right? So at your age, the brain doesn't have to stop and work out this split force production. But in little people, it's very difficult for the brain to do that. All right, so I'm going to go very quickly through here because it's kind of the same stuff and you can read it for yourselves. Okay, early hopping. Hopping, we see hopping later than jumping. Again, obvious because with jumping I've got force production from two legs. With hopping I've got to now get myself off the floor with just one leg. All right. We went through the kind of characteristics of what early hopping looks like when we looked at the MSU chart in lab. Right? More proficient hopping, the swing leg can go through a whole range of motions. So we talked about that idea of pendular hopping, although I'm not sure that's a fundamental, it's pretty complicated pendular hopping. The support leg should be fully extended. We should see some oppositional arms, all right? You can watch those. I want to make sure we look at another observation plan. Jumping, hopping. That one's got more than two components. I don't think so in measurement. Okay. All right, so we will watch this and then we'll look at the observation plan for hopping. So not dreadful. He's obviously strong enough to manage his weight, which is great. Needs some help with some technique. Okay. So he needs to stand a little taller. try to drop that bent leg back a little bit further and then start using his arms as well. But the fact that he's strong enough, right, to get all the way across there is a good start, right? Now that I can correct. Okay, if I've got someone that can barely get off the floor, then it's a different kettle of fish to try to put it right. And then this is a much older individual. So he's got a good pendular action going with the free leg, but he has a bilateral arm action. So I would want to do some work on the arm swing. But that pendular hopping is hard. Okay? So have a look at page 91. Let's find the... Okay, the developmental sequence is page 87. And this one is partially validated, so that's why it doesn't say a hypothesized sequence. Again, they've decided just on the two components, the arm action and the leg action, right? So they've got several more steps on hopping than they had on running, okay? Then if you go to page 91, we've got the observation plan for the leg action. So again, we're looking at how do I turn that developmental sequence into a usable tool that's quick and easy, because I don't have time to read through all that description when I'm trying to score something, right? So I want a quick, easy, preferably yes, no, all right? So leg action, the first question, focus on the swing leg from the side. Is the swing leg active? So they want to know if that leg is doing something or is it just out there, okay? So, if no, and it's slightly different this time, instead of having the sequence of questions go all the way down in like a waterfall, like they did for running, this time it splits into two sets of questions. Because if the leg isn't moving backwards and forwards, doesn't mean I'm not hopping, right? So that free leg being stationary doesn't mean that I'm still not hopping. It means I'm not hopping very effectively, but I could still be hopping. So they've split the questions up this time. So no, the leg isn't active. The next question is, does the support leg, the leg that's pushing, extend at takeoff to project the body upward? No would mean there's only a very short flight phase, and yes would mean that they're able to fall and catch themselves, right? And then on the other side, you can see they're asking a different question about, does the leg swing behind? Okay, so you get the idea. And then if you turn the page, they've got the observation plan for the arm action. So practice the observation plans, right? Practice using the observation plan with the film clips, because that will help you to solidify the concept of the observation plan, right? Few children under 3 I would say few children under 3.5, 3 3/4 can hop repeatedly. You're lucky if you get 3 or 4 hops in a row. So there's a lot of work for the brain to do to not just push off to get up in the air, but then you've got to land on one leg without collapsing. So we've got to learn force absorption on the landing on one leg at the same time. Right? And then we come to our combination skills, which are, from a coordination point of view, much more complicated. All right, we're going to stick together some of the previous skills that we had. All right, so I can step, I can hop, I can leap. What can I do with those skills? All right, so galloping is the first of the combination skills to emerge after running, according to the research. In my experience, the children do something that's in between a gallop and a slide. So a gallop is facing forwards. I have one leg in front. I step on that leg. I leap and land on the other leg, right? And I go forward, and the leg at the back does not cross in front, and I always lead with the same leg. Okay? So it's an asymmetric skill because my right leg and my left leg are doing two different things. Okay? Sliding, instead of going forwards, I go sideways. So I step and I leap, I step and I leap, I step and I leap, right? The research would say we see sliding after galloping. As I said, in my experience on the playground, you get something that kind of looks halfway. No, they don't always stay forwards when they're galloping unless they've been practicing it. Although if you've watched the film from last Wednesday, was it last Wednesday? No, I think it's Friday, the galloping skill. You'll see a very interesting galloping skill from a little boy, which is very unusual. So sliding is also asymmetric because to do the slide pattern, my right leg and my left leg are doing different things, right? And then typically skipping is the last combination skill to be to emerge. It takes quite a lot of strength. I have to step, I have to hop, I have to step, I have to hop. So I have to be able to hop on both feet in order to skip well. And it's a symmetric skill because each leg does the same thing. Right? Typically, girls are better at skipping than boys. Some of that is to do with the fact that they're physiologically more mature than the boys are. But also, it's a bit of a social constraint. It's a bit of an environmental constraint, right? Because skipping is considered a girly skill. Right? So we don't spend a lot of time teaching the boys how to skip. Right? But it isn't a girly skill, it's just a locomotor skill. Everybody should be able to skip. And besides, it's the most fun. Right? Skipping's a fun skill. Okay? And skipping is the one that they've now added to the TGMD3 that wasn't there on the TGMD2. Okay? let's have a look at the idea of the rate limiters, the rate controllers again for these three combination skills. So remember that from a research perspective, galloping occurs first, okay? So coordination then is a big rate limiter here because previous to galloping, we have done walking, we have done jumping, we have done running, all of which have either coupled limbs or 50% phasing. Now, for the first time, we have to uncouple the legs, and each leg has to do something different. So there's a big coordination element in there, okay? And we've got to understand how to produce force differently in each leg. This leg has to push off, this leg has to absorb on the landing, right? So there's a lot going on to gallop well, okay? Sliding, there's a little bit of coordination again. We've already uncoupled the legs for galloping. But now I have to go sideways rather than forwards, and my brain likes upright and forwards, remember. So this can be a little bit unsettling. Okay. The talking of the nervous system to the muscular system and the development of that neuromuscular pathway can play a role and limit development in these skills. Okay. Skipping, we've also got coordination, but it's a different kind of coordination because now I'm not doing a step and a leap. Now I've got to do two skills on the same leg, right? Step, hop, step, hop. Right? Force production doesn't really come into the skipping part because we've already tackled force production and force absorption in galloping and sliding. Right? But the two skills back to back on one leg is the next kind of milestone to manage. Right? We also would not include balance as a rate limiter for skipping because skipping involves hopping, and so I've already tackled balance in order to learn the hop. Does that make sense? Yeah? Thank you. Right, so we can move in all these different ways, and yet typically as humans, the locomotion pattern of choice in everyday life is bipedal walking, right? So why does that happen? You know, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is it puts our eyes, like it gives us the best view of the environment. Right? Part of it is it frees up our hands to do other things. Right? So there's lots of constraints, but let me show you this. Uh-oh. the other link there?
That face that is usually covered by our phone has finally made an appearance. That face wouldn't be doing that if you weren't staying at home.
You're about to see something truly astounding. A discovery that's caused an absolute sensation. One that could have untold significance for every one of us. And not only that, it's a totally engrossing mystery story too. You're about to meet a family that shouldn't exist. A family like no other. They could just be the missing link between man and ape. The holy grail scientists have sought for generations. They're living, breathing men and women, but they walk on all fours, just as we did 4 million years ago. And until this film was shot, they were hidden away, unseen by the outside world. A remote village in Turkey. Here, hidden from the world, lives an extraordinary family. A family whose very existence could rewrite the evolution textbooks.
It was really fascinating. You know, here are humans doing things that they're not meant to be doing.
For the past year, their existence has been known to just a handful of experts who have been sworn to secrecy. When I heard of it myself, I was intrigued, but nothing prepared me for the reality. Now, finally, the secret can be revealed.
The immediate response I had was of I couldn't believe my eyes. I never expected that in the most extraordinary scientific fantasy that modern human beings could return to an animal state.
In scientific terms, it was the equivalent of finding living, breathing fossils. Human beings who had never made the evolutionary leap of standing upright. The quest to find out why took a team of scientists on an amazing journey and raised profound questions about what it is to be human.
So the link is there if you would like to watch more of that. It's fascinating. I haven't yet seen any updates on what they have discovered. I don't think at the time, they didn't know why this family walked on all fours. They can stand up, but it's a little bit like the video we watched of the little baby. You know, they stand up, but in order to move, they'll drop down and go on all fours. So walking is very uncomfortable for them. They clearly don't enjoy walking, although one or two of them can walk a little bit. Yeah, it's a fascinating situation. So I'm always looking for updates on that. So if you ever see anything that's an update on what they know now about this family and why they developed like this, please let me know. But it goes to show that, you know, sometimes things don't work quite the way we expect them to, right? Was there not a role model to stand up? Because if you think about, you know, the majority of babies creep on their hands and knees, but they're not being modeled creeping on their hands and knees. It's not like the adults in the house are all going around on their hands and knees. That creeping behavior is quite hardwired. And so it looks as though somewhere in there that hardwiring kind of stopped somehow. It didn't develop onto standing upright. It's very, very interesting.
But isn't it because, like, they kind of chose to do that, right?
Chose is
Like,
different.
okay, so if you look at the woman, she's dressed like, I'm just thinking, how would she get dressed? She have to stand.
Well, if you watch some more of the film, they do a lot sitting down. They don't stand very often. Chose is difficult because chose implies consciousness and intent.
I don't
And
think there was consciousness there.
I think this is dynamical systems in reality for you, right? There was some combination of constraints that led their brain to prioritize this movement pattern. And then it's trying to work out what were those interacting features that led to this being the movement pattern that preferentially emerged. I don't think, and again, this is why I'm interested in in there being a follow-up, because it's been, I think the original piece of film was back in either 2015, 2016, something like that, and or when the researchers first saw them. So, I'm eagerly waiting for a report, because that would be something I'm sure that they would look at. Are they deliberately going on their hands and feet because they've decided they don't want to stand up for whatever reason, right? It's unlikely, because it's not very efficient walking around on your hands and feet, right?
So, are they like talking Turkish? Like, does they have language?
They do have some language, but there certainly is some brain development issues. Is that the only reason? I don't know. That's why I'm interested in getting this follow-up, because I think there must have been just this confluence of weird constraints that all happened together that led to this behavior. One of those, you can tell by the shape of their faces and the way their eyes move that there's definitely some brain development issues going on. But is that the only reason? There are plenty of people who have delayed cognition and other brain disorders who stand up, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So, yeah, if any of you ever see YouTube or anything that has an update on that family, please let me know, because I would love to see it. Okay, so that's the end of the locomotor chapter. So on Thursday, we will begin chapter 6, which is going to look at ballistic skills. So that will include throwing and kicking and object control type skills. Okay? Have a look at the guidelines for the observation plan assignment, so that if you've got questions, we can sort that out. You're not going into doing the assignment blind, right? You've got an idea of the concept now, so go have a look at what the requirement is, and then if you've got questions, we can have a chat about that. Okay? All right, well, the crazy Portalis weather is having a hot swing again, so enjoy the next couple of days, and I will possibly see you for lab tomorrow. It's going to depend on whether or not I can work out how to get at this film. It was a good idea to use the iPad, but they forgot that I'm not very techy. So, okay? Have fun. Possibly see you tomorrow. Keep an eye on Blackboard. And if I don't see you tomorrow, I will see you on Thursday. Bye.